Hello! This is the first of a 4-part review of Digimon Adventure 02. Now, this is the second season of Digimon Adventure, so before we begin, here's a quick recap of Season 1. In 1999, 7 kids were whisked away into the alternate dimension known as the digital world. This is the realm of the digital monsters known as Digimon. The children are partnered up with their own monster friends in order to fight evil monsters. They get some help from this old guy named Genai, who is some other digital life form. While the plot is mostly about monsters fighting each other, the characters more than make up for it. There's Tai, the hot-headed leader, Matt the loner, the tomboyish Sora, the computer whiz Izzy, the spoiled brat Mimi, Joe the coward, and the young and naive TK. Finally, there's Kari, who joins the group about halfway through the season. The Digimon can evolve into stronger monsters by using a device called a Digivice. They feed off of their partner's strongest personality trait, and in order for their Digimon to become stronger and evolve, the kids pretty much has to go through character development. Not only that, you could combine any of the 8 kids, and you'll pretty much know how they'll interact with each other. In fact, the group is frequently split up, which allows us to explore the different character dynamics. Here's a scene with Tai and Izzy. Here's one with Joe and Mimi. Here's one with Matt and Kari. And here's one with Joe and Sora. My point is that these characters have very distinct personalities, and they grow and develop like real people. After 54 episodes with these characters, it's really sad to see them go. And then came Season 2. It's not good. Number 1. Prologue. It is now 2002, and it's been 3 years since Tai and the others saved the world. Since then there have been a few other non-televised adventures, but let's not get bogged down into the timeline just yet. The narrator tells us that Tai is older, and Matt is a musician. I guess that makes sense, he had his thing with the harmonica in Season 1. And wait, why is Sora playing tennis? In Season 1 she was into soccer. I mean, it's fine that a person changes interests, but this prologue is supposed to re-establish our characters. It's supposed to remind us who these characters are. It's pretty weird that the only thing we know so far about Season 2 Sora is totally different from Season 1. We're like 5 seconds in and I'm already finding problems. And I see Kari has taken up photography. Yeah, that could be interesting. I really hope they do something with that. Like, anything. At all. Number 2. It's a whole new world we live in. Anyways, the show starts for real when we see that a fellow known to us only as the Digimon Kaiser is sending out evil rings. These rings have the power to enslave Digimon and to make them obey his every command. He can also stop monsters from evolving. It's a nice detail that he enslaves both Unimon, a good guy Digimon, and Gazimon, who were earlier shown to be bad guys. This little detail establishes that the Kaiser, while a bad guy, is his own faction and not part of any villainous team from Season 1. The scene transitions into the real world, where we meet TK, a returning character from Season 1. He's just moved into the building and meets Jolie and Cody, who are 2 of our new characters. TK introduces himself in a very exposition-heavy way, almost as if he's informing the audience more than the characters. For some reason, the characters tell each other which grade they're in. It's possible that this is a normal greeting culture thing in Japan, but it comes off more as heavy-handed exposition. It's the first day of school, and the characters decide to walk there together. This would have been an opportune moment for TK to get to know these characters. At the same time, we, the audience, would get to know them too, see what their dynamic is. But instead there's no interaction between them. TK is just walking behind the 2 new characters like a third wheel for what I assume was the entire walk to school. Why isn't he getting to know them here? Hey, have you guys ever seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer? That first episode has Buffy meeting a bunch of other characters in school too. First there's Xander, a dorky kid who develops a crush on Buffy. Their first conversation is awkward, but it establishes their arc for the season. Next up is the cool kid Cordelia. She asks Buffy a bunch of questions to find out whether she's qualified to be one of the popular girls. There's also Willow, the wallflower girl. Buffy asks her for help to get caught up in class. On top of that, there's a scene between Xander and Willow, showing what their friendship is like. We see that Cordelia looks down on the less cool Willow. And even though Xander tries to act cool, he's not cool enough for Cordelia. All of these introductions establish what each character is like, and every one of these interactions are different. Because of this, the dynamic between the characters are different too. As a result, these 4 Buffy characters resemble real people so much more, which is what you should strive for when writing characters. Compared to that, the characters in Digimon Adventure 02 are like cardboard cutouts. Anyways, Cody asks if Jolie will come to his place after school to help fix his computer. They apparently know each other already. So, what's their friendship like? When did they first meet? Well, we never find out. There's an age gap of 3 years, which is a pretty big gap when you're this young. Their mutual backstory is never explored, and they never act like they're closer than any other characters. In fact, by the end of the series, it's almost as if Digimon is the only thing they have in common, making their shared past even more of a mystery. Remember how I said that Season 1 had its groups split up from time to time in order to show how the characters work in different combinations? Well, that never happens to the Season 2 kids, with very few exceptions. For the majority of the season, we follow them exclusively as a group, meaning that we never learn how they interact when they are alone with each other. This is especially concerning when you realize that Season 1 established 7 new characters from the get-go. Season 2 begins with a group of 5 characters, but remember, TK and Kari are already established. There are only 3 new characters. The writers couldn't even handle that. When preparing this review, I rewatched the whole series, and I can't think of a single scene between only Jolie and Cody, or between only Davis and Jolie, or only Davis and Cody. But I digress. Cody says he'll email his mother about making a snack for Jolie when he gets home later. Why wouldn't he just call his mother? I would think people check their phones more than they check their email. In fact, later on in the episode, he does indeed call her. As they arrive in school, TK meets the Thai clone of this season. This is Davis, the goggle-wearing soccer player. We later learn that he's a massive Thai fanboy. To complete the picture, he also has a crush on Thai's sister Kari from the first season. TK starts in the same class as Davis and Kari. This is bad news for Davis, and now he's jealous of TK because he already knows her. This creates a love triangle between the 3 characters, but let's put a pin in that for now. Number 3. Digital gadgets. Meanwhile, over in the digital world, an enslaved Snymon is attacking a bunch of Digimon and Tai, who's here for some reason. Remember how at the end of Season 1 they said that the gate between the worlds would be closed forever? Well, it seems the show doesn't remember. Later on in episode 4, Izzy will establish that normal Season 1 Digivices do not have the ability to open digital gates. That seems like a pretty big design flaw if you ask me, but whatever. In order to open a gate, you need a D3 Digivice, which will be introduced soon enough. This begs the question, how did Tai end up in the digital world? He doesn't have a D3 Digivice. Who opened the gate for him? The Digimon don't have that power. Genai didn't seem to either, considering he told the children it was now or never at the end of Season 1. Hey, remember when Tai got sucked back into the real world in the middle of Season 1? He was able to go back to the digital world again, only because his Digivice opened the gate for him. I guess we'll call it a continuity error and move on. At this point, I'll direct your attention to that fancy little hand computer that Tai has. Izzy also has one. It's called a D-terminal, and they're used to message people and store Digimentals, which I'll talk about later. But where did I get these D-terminals from? I assumed that they were given to the chosen children by Genai, or maybe the 4 holy beasts. None of the new characters are seen with a D-terminal before they become chosen children, and no civilians ever use them. Davis never uses a D-terminal before going to the digital world. The first time we see him with one is at the end of episode 1, just when he needs somewhere to store his Digimental. As a result, I always interpreted this scene here as the beam creating the D-terminal. However, later in the series, Xinglongmon tells us that he didn't expect the children to possess these devices that could hold the Digimentals. So wait, neither the Digigods nor Genai gave the kids the D-terminals. Is this supposed to mean that the D-terminals are a product from the real world? That all the characters just happen to own? But I assumed that the D in D-terminal stood for digital, as in something from the digital world. And just look at this design and compare it to the D3 Digivices. They have the same rubber grip, the same black outline around the screen, this circular thing, the up and down arrow buttons, and this little button too. Are we really supposed to think that these are just coincidences? Oh, and if that wasn't enough, we later see in Digimon Adventure Tri that the D3s have the same logo as the D-terminals, and it's the logo of the Digimon Link system, whatever that is. But why would a real-world device, not related to the digital world, have a Digimon Link system logo? Especially since in Season 2, people in the real world don't even remember Digimon for some reason. Coincidentally, this leads me to my next point. Number 4. Nobody remembers anything until the script tells them that it's okay. Once the digital world is mentioned, Jolie starts asking what Digimon are. Why wouldn't you know this? In our war game, she was watching the Diablomon fight on the internet. That took place just 2 years before this. Davis doesn't know what Digimon are either, even though we later find out that only 3 years ago he was one of Vandemon's hostages at the Tokyo Big Sight during Season 1. Speaking of which, Japan was full of Digimon attacks during the Vandemon arc. They were filmed and showed on the news. The digital world appeared in the sky, and that's just Season 1. The movie I mentioned, our war game, has Digimon fighting on the internet, and we see that people all over the world are watching. People know about Digimon. Why doesn't anybody remember? In Season 2 there's a bunch of scenes at Izzy's place, which involves hiding the digital aspect of his life from his mother. But what about this scene in Season 1 where his parents learned about Tentomon and Digimon in general? Why doesn't she remember this? Episode 39 of Season 2 attempts to explain this. Genai pops out of a computer and for some reason he looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi in this season, but we'll talk about that later. Apparently Genai erased all of the secret data from some databases. I guess he removed news footage of Digimon from the Vandemon arc too. Okay, fine, but that still doesn't explain why people don't remember. Both Jolie and Cody express cluelessness when spoken to about Digimon in the first episode. However, in episode 39, Genai asks Cody about the events of 3 years prior, and then he says he remembers? What's up with that?
3年前、デジタルワールドが現実世界に異常接近したことがあったのを覚えているかな？
はい、覚えています。
あの事件は世界中の人たちが目撃した。
Yet just a few seconds later, he says this.
下手にデジモンが公になれば、何に悪用されるかわからない。
Aren't they already public knowledge though? Yeah, fuck it. Number 5. The Next Generation. Tai finds this strange thing in the digital world and decides to touch it because it bears the crest of courage, which is a symbol associated with himself. However, touching it sends 3 beams of light to the real world. These are D3 Digivices, which arrive in the hands of the 3 new characters, meaning that they are the new chosen children. For some reason, Jolie and Cody are not allowed to follow along on the adventure until episode 2. This time, it's only TK, Kari and Davis. So, we later find out that the Kaiser has been infected with evil for 2 years already. Why are the chosen children called now? Did it really take the Kaiser this long to start attacking everything? Why? What's been keeping him? And couldn't the Digigods sense the evil within him back when he was infected? They could have activated Davis, Jolie and Cody 2 years ago, and then they would have been more prepared when the Kaiser sent out his first rings. Instead, nothing happens for 2 years, and then Tai, of all people, is sent into the digital world in order to send Digivices to the new kids. who then have to go into the digital world and beat the bad guy. Couldn't you just have sent the Digivices to the new kids directly? You know, like how it worked in Season 1? How did the characters suddenly know that pointing your Digivice towards the screen is the way to go into the Digiworld? Remember, in Season 1 they were just kind of sucked into it somehow. There was no pointing of a Digivice involved. On a related note, Season 2 also introduces these little TV sets that act as digiportals on the digital side of the gate. Why is it that you can just go to the digital world on a whim nowadays? In Season 1, the kids were stuck there. There were no convenient TV sets that could just send them home when it was nap time. Their whole motivation was to go home. Saving the digital world didn't become the primary task until they got invested in the Digimon themselves. Placing little TV sets everywhere just cheapens everything, including the sense of adventure. Being able to teleport home in a matter of seconds just cheapens the stakes. These things aren't even plugged in, they're portable. Why don't they just bring them along on their adventures? Like put it on a little carriage and stroll it around. How about you recruit a Digimon who could carry a TV set into the Kaiser's base unnoticed? Then when you enter the gate, you would already be inside the base. Bring some sticks of dynamite and blow that shit up. Alternatively, you could simply recruit Bomber Nanimon, ask him to blow up. I'm sure he'd rather sacrifice himself for all the Digiworld than become a mind slave. Number 6. Wardrobe malfunction. Once the characters pop into the digital world, Davis is surprised to see that he has gotten new clothes. And I am too. Why don't the Season 1 characters get digital clothes? It's just the new characters. I guess this is like a mental thing, but why is it automatic? They don't even have to actively want this wardrobe change. It just happens. Why hasn't this happened before? Well, maybe there wasn't ever a need for a change in clothes. No, that's not true either, because in Season 1, Episode 9, Matt almost froze to death because he went out in the snow looking for TK. But I guess he failed to imagine wearing a fur coat at the time. It's not until the 33rd episode of Season 2 where we get an explanation. Sort of. In the episode about Yole having a day off in Kyoto, we get a random scene with Izzy sitting down with Ken, throwing out theories about these things. This scene just screams of the writers desperately trying to patch up the holes they punched in logic in these early episodes. Izzy explains that
デジタルワールドではデータが集合するときにまず形を決めるシステムがあるようなのです。本人がそう思い込んだ形を読み取ってその通りにデータを組み上げていく。大輔くんたちの服装が変わるのも多分そのせいです。
Okay, but this theory fails to take the fact that other characters' clothes don't change into account. Tai, Matt, Sora, their clothes stay the same, and TK and Kari's digi-clothes are the same that they wear in the real world early on in the season. However, later on, they switch to wearing summer clothing in the real world, but their digi-clothing remains the same. How does that work? 3 years earlier, they had one set of digital clothes, and now they have another. How did the digital world know when it was time to update their wardrobe? Why does that only work for certain characters? If TK wanted to wear his Season 1 outfit, would the Digiworld resize it for him? What are the rules here? In a later episode, Kari goes to the digital world, but she still keeps her real world clothes. Did the animators forget that this season has different wardrobe rules than Season 1? Did she suddenly decide to update her look? Then why is she back to wearing her normal digital clothes the next time? There's also the last episode where Cody wears his real world clothes in this emotion realm, but as soon as he runs into the digital world, his clothes update to his digital wardrobe. Now that makes sense with the rules we've established, so why doesn't Cody's clothes change back into his real clothes once he gets back into the emotion world? Why did they include these wardrobe rules if they weren't going to do anything with it? I mean, it never impacts the story, it just creates problems. Okay, so TK, Kari and Davis arrive in the digital world, but shouldn't they react to the fact that Izzy isn't coming along? I mean, he was right behind them. They don't know what happened to him. Oh well, I guess we're moving on. Davis gets ambushed by a bunch of Numemon. Now, Numemon's only character trait in Season 1 was that they hate sunlight, but I guess the writers forgot to go back and check what they said in Season 1, huh? Well, I checked, I rewatched the entire season 1 and the movies. And I also played through those video games, but I guess it would be too much to expect that the people who write for a show should be familiar with the lore. But then again, there's another episode in season 1 where a bunch of newmen work for Kokatrimon on a ship out in the desert, and there's sunlight. So even season 1 broke this sunlight rule. Fair enough, season 2, I'll let you off the hook this time. Number 7, Kitty Cat Ring. The time has come for our characters to meet up with Tai and some Digimon. We learn that Gatomon has lost her tail ring, essentially making her as weak as a child level. Okay, so to refresh your memory, the Digimon levels are 2 baby stages, then child, adult, perfect and mega. Actually, the final stage is called ultimate in Japanese, but ultimate happens to be the dub name for the perfect level. This means that ultimate potentially refers to 2 different levels. In order to minimize confusion, I'll call the final stage Mega in this review. As you can see, the monsters start out looking pretty pathetic, but will eventually end up as really powerful beasts. Gatomon is normally at the adult level, but has now been nerfed down to child. So why did I do this? Why did I remove her holy ring? This doesn't affect the story too much. So why is it here? Well, in season 1, Gatomon said that because of her discipline, she can remain in the adult level as her default form. She is actually stronger than the other partner monsters' adult forms. This was fine in season 1, when the others were already at the adult level, but at this point in season 2, we're stuck with 4 other child monsters. Gatomon would be the go-to fighter for the group, and we can't have that in Digimon. However, weakening Gatomon would make all of the partner monsters equally strong. So why didn't they just de-evolve Gatomon into Plotmon and make that her regular form? Well, I believe it comes down to Plotmon not being as iconic as Gatomon. Kids would be confused if Kari walked around with Plotmon. I mean, Plotmon was only in like 3 episodes of season 1. So in order to nerf Gatomon, they decided that the root of her powers lie in the holy ring on her tail. I can agree that a holy ring should buff the Digimon's strength, but removing it shouldn't make Gatomon as weak as a child. It shouldn't be responsible for half of her powers. A ringless Gatomon should at least be as strong as a regular adult. But then there's also the discipline that came from her tough upbringing, which should buff her back up a bit. Not only does this nerfing discredit her character, but it also makes no sense. This sequence is from a later episode. It's supposed to show the Digimon evolving into the adult level, yet Gatomon is evolving into her perfect form. Why aren't they showing Plotmon turning into Gatomon? Hey, if we're pretending that Gatomon is the child level now, how come she's strong enough to fuse into a perfect monster with Aquilamon later? It's established that you need adult levels for that. And when degenerating from the fusions, the others turn back into their first baby stages, but Gatomon only turns back into Plotmon, her child stage. That's 2 levels above the first baby stage. What are you even doing? Also, how does losing the ring work if she evolves? Does the ring evolve with her? Is the holy ring that Plotmon wears around its neck the same ring that Gatomon has on her tail and that Anjouwon wears around her ankle? I would assume it comes into being from digital matter when Nyaromon turns into Plotmon. It's part of her data, like an organ or something. I just think it's weird that when Gatomon evolves into Anjouwon later, that ring is still lying on the ground somewhere, even though Anjouwon wears an identical one around her ankle. How far away would the ring have to be in order to not evolve with her? Here? Here? If she holds it in her paws, she's at least in contact with it. Would that count? Later in the series, Gatomon turns back into Plotmon, and just like Anjouwon, Plotmon wears a holy ring. But once she evolves back into Gatomon next time, the ring is gone once more. How does that work? Couldn't you just take off the ring from Plotmon and then have her evolve and just put the ring onto Gatomon? If the ring is part of the creature, then how could it be removed from Gatomon in the first place? This doesn't make any sense to me. Number 8. Digimental. There's a strange artifact known as the Digimental stuck in the ground. The Digimentals will allow Digimon to armor evolve, which can circumvent the Digimon Kaiser's anti-evolution mischiefs. It appears that Davis is the only one who can move this Digimental. As I mentioned before, this insignia on the Digimental is the Crest of Courage. Each of the crests that were featured in Season 1 now has a corresponding Digimental. Coincidentally enough, the human associated with the crest always happened to be around in the episode where the Digimental is discovered. For example, in episode 2, where the Digimentals of Love and Knowledge are found, Sora and Izzy from Season 1 tag along. This is very forced, and Season 2 is riddled with coincidences like this. Trapped below the Digimental is Davis' Digimon partner Vmon. We later find out that Hawkmon and Armadillomon, who are the other two partner monsters, also have been imprisoned under Digimentals for a very long time. This begs a few questions. Are Vmon and the others' imprisonings related, or is trapping Digimon like this just a regular thing? How come there were Digimon under these Digimentals, but not under any of the other ones we later find? And also, what would have happened if the kids found Hawkmon and Armadillomon's Digimentals before Vmon's? I mean, the D3 Digivices were inside the Digimental of Courage, right? If Jolie and Cody didn't have their Digivices, they wouldn't have been able to Digivolve. I mean, it sure was lucky that they found the Digimentals in this order. I mentioned before that episode 37 has the Digigod Qinglongmon come down from the sky and give us some answers. Let's see what he has to say about this thing.
古代の力を残したデジモンを何体か選んで眠らせ、暗黒の力に対抗するために新しいデジバイスを3つ作った。
But why would you put Vmon and the other two to sleep? Why not just have them waiting for Davis, Jolie and Cody like it was in Season 1? And what does it mean that those Digimon have ancient powers?
この世界に暗黒のデジバイスが生み出された時、調和の石が探し出した古代の進化の力を持つデジモンは3体だけだったが、一緒に来た元の紋章の力を持つ子供のデジモンのうち2体は古代の進化を使えるものだった。
But there are lots of other Digimon who can use Digimentals to armor evolve. And if you're aware that the powers of darkness are lurking, why put the Digimons to sleep? Why not give them to a human partner immediately? What's this about Patamon and Gatomon being the only Season 1 monsters who can use armor evolution? Since then, we've seen that lots of the originals can do it. There was an audio drama called Armor Evolution to the Unknown, which had everyone except Agumon use their respective Digimentals to successfully evolve into a new monster. If that's not enough, Tentomon can evolve into either Salamandermon or Flame Wizardmon by using the Digimental of Courage.
3体のデジモンは別の紋章の進化もできる。そして友情、純真、誠実のデジメンタルはその力が必要とされた時贈られた。
Wait, so what was the original plan for the Digimentals of friendship, purity and sincerity? If a Digimon was only supposed to be able to use one Digimental, which would be the one they were imprisoned with, then why not imprison 3 more Digimon for the last 3 Digimentals? Alternatively, why not give the spare ones to some other chosen kids? At the end of the season, we see that there are hundreds of children with Digimon partners. At least 3 of them must be compatible with armor evolution. Like this Mexican girl with the Gotsumon. Hey Davis, give her a Digimental. Gotsumon can turn into a Thunderbird. I mean, Vmon, Hawkmon and Armadillomon can only use one Digimental at a time. The last 3 would just sit there in the D-terminals, doing nothing. This scene, or rather this whole episode, just creates more questions than it answers. Number 9. Digimental down. The Kaiser sends a brainwashed Monochromon to attack our heroes. Vmon tells Davis to say the magic words, Digimental up, which I don't think is grammatically correct English. How about Digimental activate or something like that? Why up? And also, why is this evolution voice activated? One of the things that made Season 1 great is that in order for the Digimon to evolve, their partners needed to become stronger in whatever virtue their crest contained. To reach the perfect level, Tai needs to be brave, Matt needs to be friendly, TK needs to be hopeful. It's a brilliant way to implement character development into the show. Of course, Season 2 doesn't have crest or perfect evolutions. Instead, we got the Digimentals. The comparison is apt, since both deals with the same 8 virtues of courage, friendship, love, knowledge, purity, sincerity, hope, and light. In order to pull out the Digimental of courage and activate it, Davis would logically have to display courage. There are a few problems with this. For starters, Davis is introduced as a headstrong kid who rushes into trouble without thinking too much. The same could be said for Ty at the start of the first season. However, at the climax of the second arc, Ty had to face not only his own mortality, but the mortality of his friends. We saw him doubting himself for the first time in the series, and yet, in a moment of bravery, he overcame his fear, which allowed Greymon to evolve. Let's compare that to Davis. In order for Vmon to evolve into Flamedramon, Davis has to be brave enough to fight back against Monochromon when everything seems hopeless. But this isn't a development of his personality. He has been willing to fight this entire episode. He didn't become extra courageous. He's the same character as he was before, meaning that no actual character development has occurred. Davis isn't brave, he's just too stupid to be afraid. Another thing to point out is that Ty's Crest of Courage is activated for the first time in episode 20 of season 1. Davis's character development, if you can call it that, happens in episode 1. This doesn't work because at this point we haven't even finished establishing Davis's character. Yet, we've already rushed into development territory. I believe this is because the writers want to show the monsters evolving. As a result, the requirements for armor evolutions are rushed and confusing. Having character development in the form of becoming braver has a lot of potential, meaning that this situation with Davis feels like a missed opportunity in retrospect. We've got 49 episodes left of this series. One imagines that the narrative would have been better served if Davis would have learned this lesson for real a bit later on in the season instead. At this point I will question why Davis was the one to be paired up with the Digimental of Courage. Davis was created to basically be a stupider version of Ty, and he will be wielding courage like Ty and friendship like Matt. As we will see, Jolie is the geek of the group. She's even a superfan of Izzy, and yet she inherits Sora and Mimi's crests, love and purity. Cody is mostly shy, but also sincere like Yo, yet he also gets the Digimental pertaining to Izzy's crest. The virtues of the crests were originally shaped around the personalities of the Season 1 characters. However, you can't just graft those onto your new characters and pretend that those are compatible. Why didn't Jolie get the Digimental of Knowledge if she's into computers like Izzy? Why didn't Davis get the Digimental of Love if his whole thing is that he has a crush on Kari? Why didn't he get the Digimental of Purity, since he's the one who always speaks his mind and isn't afraid to be himself? Why didn't Ken get any Digimental? Wouldn't it have been nice to give him the Digimental of Friendship once he's finally accepted into the group and, has friends? Number 10. Davis's character. If the goal is to show characters developing via these Digimentals, then they should start out being weak in these aspects. If Davis's character development will involve courage and friendship, then he should start out as a coward who isn't a very good friend. Through his adventures in the digital world, he should become braver and a better friend. As proof of his achievements, the relevant Digimental should activate. However, Davis is brave from the start, and throughout the series he remains too selfish to be called a good friend. I don't consider his character arc to be successfully written. I assume the writers made Davis into this character simply because they wanted to recreate Ty, the leader of the group. This is painfully obvious, as he even inherits Ty's goggles at the end of the first episode. I would instead have given the leader role to TK. It seemed like this was the way they were going at the start of the first episode. We follow TK as he meets each of the new characters, but then Davis takes over for some reason. In season 1, TK was the youngest member of the group and had to mature fast to keep up. During the final arc, he was even able to step up and save the group all by himself. His journey from crybaby to hero was complete. It would therefore make perfect sense for him to be the leader in the next generation. This would of course give Davis even more reason to be jealous of him. Speaking of which, I also think more should have been done about the love triangle between TK, Kari and Davis. It would be interesting to find out why Davis likes Kari specifically. What does he like about her? I mean, he's an 11-year-old boy. I would understand if it was simply, ooh, I think she's cute. But it would be more interesting if there was something more going on there. This is extra relevant, since it seems to be one of Davis's few character traits in the show. However, the writers never really do anything with this. It's clear to us that Kari isn't interested in him, and his romantic feelings are only a vehicle for quick jokes and occasional motivation. There is never a moment where he confronts Kari about how he feels. There's never a moment where he starts a conflict with TK because of how he feels. There's not even a moment when he decides to come to terms with the fact that Kari doesn't like him that way. It's just a crutch for humor and not a realistic take on pre-teen romance. You could really develop this conflict and maybe have Davis' jealousy turn into resentment towards TK. The Kaiser could notice this and start to play the kids against each other. Even in episode 7, where Davis and TK are alone out in the desert, we don't get much character interaction of substance between them. How about we see that while Davis resents TK, he can't help but also respect him. Maybe TK saves him, which would force Davis to rethink his resentment. Then you could put Davis in a situation like this one from episode 8, where the Kaiser has kidnapped all of the other characters and Davis has to choose which one who lives. However, rather than choosing one friend that can be saved, why not make it so that he has to choose which one of his friends that will be eaten? At first he would go for TK, but after reconsidering, he instead chooses to sacrifice himself. It would be similar to the original episode, but by doing it this way, you could get a more dramatic story. Davis would be overcoming his weakness. His actions would be motivated by his experiences. You could even place the activation of the Digimental of friendship at this point of the story, which would both save the day and solidify a newfound friendship with TK. At this point, maybe both of them could act as leaders. Their different strengths could complement each other. Different styles of leadership are needed at different times. You could have TK losing his shit when he sees Digimon again, meaning that Davis would have to step up as the lone leader for a while. Of course, TK's relationship with Digimon would have to be built up more, but my point with all this is that there are a lot of things you could do with these characters, and the show didn't do much of anything with them. At this point, I just really want to see Davis having a character arc. How about we first see him without goggles? After the first episode, he starts to idolize Tai, to the point that next day in school, he shows up wearing his own goggles. People laugh at him, but he sticks to his guns. Flash forward to the final episode, where the final battle could blow his goggles to smithereens. At that point, Tai could give him his goggles and say, "You've earned them, kid." Getting Tai's respect should have been the drive for Davis throughout the story. Instead, Tai gives Davis the goggles just as soon as Flamedramon defeats the bad guy. Right here in episode 1, it's like the writers are just forcing Davis as the new leader down our throats. The narrator leaves us with the menacing question of who this evil Digimon Kaiser really is. And I guess that would have been effective if the intro hadn't already spoiled that for us. See that guy whose face just floats by here? That's him. That's the Kaiser. His name is Ken. This isn't the only thing the intro spoils, by the way. There's also the fact that Davis, Yoli and Cody are the new chosen children. And the biggest spoiler is probably the designs of all the Digimon's child and armor forms. Let me stress this point. The biggest draw for kids to watch Digimon is to see new and fun monsters. If you spoil those in the intro, what's left? Sure, there's story and characters, but as we've seen so far, those two aren't really Season 2's strong points. Now, to be fair, Season 1 spoiled its monsters in the intro sequence as well, and I think that's equally bad. They even spoiled that Kari was the 8th child in the outro, and I don't like it. Anyways, with that tangent out of the way, part 1 of this review is at its end. Now that I've complained about the basic foundations of the season, the rest of the episodes will take less time to cover, so don't worry. I'll see you in part 2. Goodbye.